Hello and welcome to another video in the Microsoft Fabric series. Today, we're diving into the world of time intelligence, specifically within a multi-company setup. In this scenario, we're working with a date table where the dates vary based on the company. Each company has its own financial year within this date table. The date table is a multi-company or multi-tenant date table where there is a full calendar for each company. This means the date is not a primary key in the table. Date plus company ID is the primary key. This scenario means we can't rely on a single date table with multiple columns. How will time intelligence work in such a scenario? This is what we want to explore. Our main goal is to see how time-related analysis works in this situation. We want to test whether Power BI's time intelligence measures or formulas we create, called DAX measures, can handle a calendar with repeating dates. We'll use calculation year-to-date, means YTD calculations, and other time-related formulas to see how they perform. It is important to note that this configuration applies to Power BI as well. An implementation of Power BI with same setup will work in the same way. Let's get started on app.powerbi.com, which serves as both Power BI service and Microsoft Fabric. I am currently on app.powerbi.com. I will navigate to the workspace, and for this demonstration, I will use one of my existing workspaces, which is 01 Fabric. However, within this workspace, I will create a new data warehouse to showcase what I have planned for today. For that, I need to click on left top menu, New, and then Use, Show All. Let me scroll down a bit and I'll click Data Warehouse and create a new data warehouse with the name multi-company, which means multi-comp. I have successfully created a data warehouse, and within this warehouse, I will create a data flow gen 2. I'll bring data into this warehouse using data flow gen 2. As we are going to use data flow gen 2 to load the data, let's allow some time for this warehouse to load. Currently, I don't have multi-company data, so today I'll also guide you on how to create multi-company data. The data I am going to import today will once again originate from my GitHub account. If you have been following my series Microsoft Fabric, you already know that it is located at the following address: github.com/amit-shandak-pbi/powerbi. From my GitHub account, I'll use sales data for Fabric. I'll click on this and a new window will open. In the new window, simply right-click on raw and copy the link. This raw link is one which will work directly on Power BI. In between, my warehouse is ready. Let's move on to the next step. I'm going to click on Get Data, and from there, I'll initiate a new Data Flow Gen 2. I'm starting it from here rather than using the direct new option in the workspace, and I'll explain the advantage shortly. Now, let's dive into Data Flow Gen 2. First, I'll give this Data Flow Gen 2 a new name, Data Load. On the top left, I have the data flow name. Click on that and provide a new name, Data Load. Press Enter. It will be renamed. Let's load the data in Data Flow Gen 2. On the Home tab, navigate to Get Data and choose the option More. Next, I will search for Web API. I'll choose the Web API option. In the next section, I'll enter the URL. The URL I copied from GitHub. Because I've connected to it before, it automatically fetches the necessary information. I can select the sheets I want. I plan to use only 2 sheets. The sales sheet, which I'll turn into a multi-company sales table, and the item sheet, which I'll leave as it is. I'll also create a multi-company date table. Once the data is loaded, you'll notice the warehouse destination is already set up. I'll make a slight adjustment to it. But before that, let me do what I intended. To set up a multi-company scenario, I need to duplicate the sale table. Right-click here and choose Duplicate. So I have 2 sales tables now. I also wanted to bring 2 date tables. I have already created a script for that, and the 2 scripts have very little difference. I am going to bring the Power Query script I've already created. This is the same script I used in the previous videos in this series. I'll also make it available on a blog. Let me tell you the steps to bring these date tables. I will click on Get Data left top on the Home menu and then use Blank Query. Let it open. Now I will paste the code, and this code will give me a calendar table with FY starting from April. I will rename it by double clicking. The same option is available on the right click menu. Let me name it Date. Let's observe this table. You can see that the financial year starts in April, and I have added a column for company ID, and the value in this case is 1. The 4th quarter of 2017 began in January 2017 and ended in March 2017. I'll add another date table now. This date table is very similar to the previous. Again, I will click on the data on left top of the home menu and then use a blank query. Let it open. Now I will paste the code and this code will give me a calendar table with FY starting from January. This new calendar or date table uses company ID 2 and financial year is same as calendar year. The two tables have many columns in them. However, I will not go into details in today's video. These are full-fledged date tables. Let me rename the table. Double click, rename, name the table as date 1. The sales tables here does not have a company ID. I need a column for that in both tables. To add a column, I will navigate to add column at the top of the ribbon. There is an option to create a custom column. Let me click on that to create a custom column. I will name this column company ID. And I will set the static value for this column. The value I will use is 1. I will set the data type to whole numbers. Click on OK to save the column. I need to repeat this on the sales to table. To add a column, I will navigate to add column at the top of the ribbon. There is an option to create a custom column. Let me click on that to create a custom column. I will name this column company ID and I will set the static value for this column. The value I will use is 2. Click on OK to save the column. Next step is to merge these queries to create a multi-company single sales full table. To do so, I will navigate to the Home tab. On the right hand side there are options for merge queries and append queries. In this case I need to append the data. On append queries, I will click on the down arrow key and use append queries as new. Our goal here is to ensure that our columns we want to combine has the same column name. The columns with the same name will be merged together. I have selected the sales and sales to tables. Let me click OK. We'll also verify if we have data for both company IDs. Once I click on the down arrow, I will also click on load more at the right bottom of this pop-up. Once this is loaded, we need to make sure we have both company IDs. Let's rename this table as sales full. This is where things get interesting. It's a multi-company data set and it contains the same data. In order to make validation easier, I have kept the data same. It is possible to try with some variance. However, the data I provided can be manually modified for this purpose. Next step, I need to create a date full table. I will go back to the Home tab. On the right hand side there is an option to append queries. On append queries, I will click on the down arrow key and use append queries as new. Let me select the date and date 1 tables. Let me click OK. New table is created. Double click and rename. Name this one as date full. Again, let us navigate to the company column and ensure we have both companies ID. This step can also be achieved in SQL. For those of you who have seen my previous video where I demonstrated creating a unique identifier and then joining it back with your fact staging table to create a fact table with IDs using unique identifier. If you prefer to perform this transformation in SQL rather than using Power Query, I recommend watching that video. However, in this tutorial, we'll use Power Query for generating an ID column and use it for fact mapping. To add ID column in Power Query, I will use the index column. I will navigate to add column at the top of the ribbon. There is an option to add an index column. Let me click on that to create a column. I'll select that and add an index column starting at 1. I can also rename this index column in the function box instead of adding an additional step of rename column. I'll name it date key. I will add this column as a foreign key to my sales full table. This key will be essential as I'm planning to create a one-to-many single directional join. To perform this one-to-many single directional join, I require this unique key in the sales full table. Here's how I'll accomplish that. Click on the sales full table. Navigate to the Home tab. In the Home tab, go to Merge Queries. This time, I will use only Merge Queries. I will add the date key in the sales full table. To merge this data, we must select more than one column. To do so, I'll scroll to the right and click on the company ID column. Then, I'll hold the Control key and click on the sales date column. Similarly, in the date table, I'll scroll to the right and click on the company ID column. Then return and click on the date while keeping the Control key pressed. The system will now estimate the matching row. I'm expecting 60,000 rows as a result of matching, confirming that the join is correct. And it is 60,000. I can now press OK at the bottom. This action will add the date full table as a new column in the sales table at the end. The only column we need is the date key. To do this, in the top right corner of this date full column we have a small expand icon. I'll click on the expand icon. uncheck all the columns and select only the date key and press OK. The new data is loaded. I will now click on the small down arrow next to the column name to check for null values. I have no null values, means all rows have the date key. Now let's map the destinations. As you can see, everything has a default destination and they receive default names. However, there's one destination where the default name is incorrect. As far as the table name is concerned, I don't want to keep any special characters. Also, I do not want the sales 2 table and the date 1 table in my destination. Then I'll go ahead and remove them. For the other destinations, it is already set, but I can modify that. But what I'm planning to do is remove the destinations for sales 2 and date 1. For the rest of the tables, I'm not assigning specific destinations. I will keep them as is. If it does not work, I will correct it. Now let's publish without making any changes to my settings. I'll click on the publish button at the bottom of the page. It takes me back to my 01 Fabric workspace. I'll scroll down a little bit and check my data flow. Currently, it is being published. You see publish in progress, and if everything works out well, it should be published within a minute or two. Thereafter, the loading icon will shift from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. The process of refresh in progress has begun now. We'll need to wait for refresh in progress to finish. This process will move the data to our data warehouse. Once this process is completed, we'll have the data in the data warehouse, and then we can move on to the next step, which involves checking our time intelligence. However, there's an error showing up. I suspect this might have happened because I hadn't properly assigned destinations and some data types are missing. Although it appears to work at first, it does fail for all of them during the writing process. So I need to open the data flow gen 2 and check for any space or special character in the name. Missing data type or remap manually for all the tables. I am going to start by renaming all the tables in order to make sure they do not contain any spaces in their names. I'll make it sales 2 even though I'm not loading it. Similarly, I'll remove spaces from sales fall and date fall. I'll also ensure that none of the columns have spaces. Before manually mapping everything, I'd like to try it again to see if we can use this feature directly from Data Flow Gen 2 without assigning destinations. So I clicked on Publish at the bottom right. The objective here is not to set destinations manually, I want it to work automatically. Let's see if it gets published successfully. The data load and data flow have been refreshed successfully this time. I have done a few attempts in between to achieve this result. There were some problems in between, which I fixed. One of the issues with this report was that one of the columns lacked a data type, and there were some mapping issues as well. As a result, I had to manually map everything in the end. Now that I have successfully loaded the data into my warehouse, I can see that my data flow is successful. Let's go to my data warehouse and check it out. I will navigate to my multi-company warehouse. Now, in the multi-company warehouse, let's quickly check if I have all the tables I need. Here's what I'm planning to do in this warehouse. I have a sales for table and a date for table containing multi-company data and a common item table. Additionally, I have a date table and a sales table without multi-company data, which are for verification purposes. It appears that all tables are correct. So I'll create two schema sets. One schema will include sales, item, and date tables. The other schema will consist of date fall, sales fall, and the item table. Now let me switch to the modeling tab and begin the configuration. The option for that is available at the bottom. For me to be able to see the tables together, I need to rearrange them. Several tables need to be dragged here and there to ensure that I can have a schema view to create relationships between the tables. This is how I envision my setup. I want my item ID in sales for table to join with the item ID in item table. In this case, I expect a single directional join that goes many to one. And I got exactly what I wanted. Now with the second table, I also expect the item table to perform the same join. Keep in mind that we are working with two schemas here. One is the multi-dimensional multi-company schema and the second is the normal schema. We'll compare time intelligence in both of them. Next, let's do a date key join between sales fall and date fall. Again, we expect a one-to-many single directional join because the date key is not repeated in date fall table. Also, a single directional join. It's many to one in this case because sales fall is the first table. Now it's taking a while to display. I'll complete our transformation and modeling. Next is to join date table with sales table using sales date from sales table and date from date table. Sales will be on the many side in a one-to-many relationship. I have completed my schema with all the desired relationships. Now we need to create measures. These measures will allow us to test time intelligence with a normal versus multi-company schema. Two schema sets have been created and we are ready to create new measures. We have an option for that in model view, so we can configure that from here in this UI without moving to another application. Let's begin by creating some measures in the sales table. I'll click on the sales table and use the top menu option. New measure. The first measure I'll create is called gross. It's a simple measure, just sum x of sales quantity multiplied by sales price. That's our first measure. Now let's move on to the second measure, which is a time intelligence measure, and that will use the measure we created before. Time intelligence measure gross YTD. Gross YTD equals calculate gross comma dates YTD date of date table. Now I'll create another measure, a row context measure. Time intelligence measures also use row context, but this one is specifically for the current month. Current month measure. Current month equals calculate gross comma filter comma all of date table comma month year sort of date table equal max of month year sort of date table. I also need to create the same measures in my sales fall table. To do that, I'll scroll to the sales fall table and click on sales fall. I will again use the new measure option on the top to create the measures. Now let's create the same measures in the sales fall table. Gross fall measure. Gross fall equals sum x, sales fall comma, sales quantity of sales fall, multiply sales price of sales fall. We'll use this gross fall measure in the next two measures, similar to what we did with the sales table. Gross fall YTD measure. Gross fall YTD equal calculate gross fall comma dates YTD date of date fall table. Current month fall measure. Current month fall equal calculate gross fall comma filter all of date fall table comma month year sort of date fall equal max of month year sort of date fall. Now that our measures are set up, let's ensure that the sorting is correct for the month year column in both date tables. We'll move to both date tables and correct the sorting in the month year column. For each table, we'll navigate to the month year column, access the column tools at the top, and use the sort by column option to sort by the month year sort column. Lastly, we'll mark these tables as date tables. First, I'll right click on the three dots of the date table and mark as date table. Choose the date column of the table and click on OK. For the date table, it should work fine because every date is unique. Let us go back and validate it has been marked as date table or not. Yes, it has been marked as date table. Now let's mark the date fall table as a date table as well. Right click on the three dots of the date fall table and mark as date table. Choose the date column of the table and click on OK. Let us go back and validate it has been marked as date table or not. Yes, it has been marked as date table. Although it has duplicate dates, they are still in continuous order, so it should work. Now our setup is complete. We can create visualizations. But before that, I'll create another measure, gross 2, in the sales table, which is simply double the gross measure. This measure will help us compare Now let's create the first report. On the top menu, there is an option for a new report. Let me click on new report to create a new report. Now I want to compare my data. The first thing I want to know is whether my data is the same or not. That's why you remember I created a column with gross multiplied by 2. I would like to create the first visual using the item table that is connected to both the sales and the sales fall tables. Let me bring brand from item into the visualization area and it will create a table visual. Then I will navigate to sales fall and I will bring in gross fall and add it to the same table visual. From the sales table, let me bring in gross 2 and gross. The gross fall data should match the gross 2 data. There are 2 companies that contribute to gross fall and this is double the gross amount. Now let's bring in the next visual, which we will bring in is the month year from the date table and the columns from the sales and sales fall. We cannot do it together because they use different date tables. Let me create a visual on date fall and sales fall first. I am intending to bring in month year from date fall and I'm going to bring in gross fall from sale fall. Let me also add gross fall YTD. All 3 are now added to the visual. Let me create a similar visual for the sales and date table. I will navigate to the date table and bring in month and year from the date table and gross YTD measures from the sales. I will also add gross 2, which is double the gross for validation. As you can see, the gross fall YTD is double of gross YTD. If we navigate to December in the visual, you see gross fall YTD is around 63 and this gross YTD is around 31.9. If I double up the gross YTD, it will match the gross fall YTD. What I can do here to match these numbers, I can bring in the company ID either as a filter or in the visual. So let me add the company ID here in the visual first. I will add it to visual first and use the right click option, don't summarize. Moving it to the first position would be great. Now you can see the numbers. Now you can view the December data. Same number repeats for both companies and matches sales table. Let me highlight these numbers for you. Previously, it was added when we didn't have the company filter. I'll show you something really interesting. Let me click on a month here, May 2019. We are using 2 different date tables. Because of that, gross and gross 2 are getting filtered when I click on the table using the period from the date table, not the gross fall, because gross fall is not filtered by the date table. Let me now filter May 2019 and company 1 in the visual, having period from the fall table. Now it matches with the gross. I just control and click on the record having company 2 data for May 2019. The value of gross fall will now match with gross 2, so the time intelligence works properly. Next item we would like to test is the current month measure. I will do that on a new page. There I will plot the 2 current measures with date from respective date table to show data of full month in front of each date. To get a new page, I can use the plus button in teal color at the bottom of the page. The first visual I will add is table visual based on date and sales table. I will drag the date from the date table into visualization pane to render the table visual. From the sales table, I will now add the current month measure in the same table visual. In the second visual, I will add date from date fall and current sales from sales fall table. I will drag date from date fall table into visualization pane to render the table visual. From the sales fall table, I will now add the current month fall measure in the same table visual. You will see that the value in current month fall is double that in current month. I'm getting double data in October. Same is true for November. Because I have 2 companies, my data is doubled for the sales fall table. To test it further, I can bring a slicer from the visualization pane. I can add the company ID from the sales fall table to that one. I can convert the slicer into a drop-down list using the format property under the visualization tool. I can select company 1 in the slicer and you will see my numbers match between current month and current month fall measures. We have tested again that time intelligence works fine. For a measure using row context, we use a multi-company calendar here and both companies have their own calendar within the same date table. It is still possible to perform time intelligence using standard Power BI functionality. Now we need to see what happens when we bring quarter year together. As the quarter number depends on the company, data from 2 quarters with the different start dates can merge together. Let me add another page to test that. Navigate to the date field table and add the quarter year to the table visual. From the date field, the column name is quarter FY. I also want to include FY quarter start date. We'll sort it on that. What you observe, quarters with the same name have two different start dates. Let me add the gross full measure to the visual from the sales field table. It now gives me the same number in two different quarters. This is the same quarter start date that falls into two different financial quarters. Let me duplicate this visual to have one more table visual. So if I move ahead now and remove this quarter start date, what's actually happening is that the number Q1 2019 is a combination of two different quarters by start date but summed up into the same quarter by name. So if I look at it from a broader perspective, the first quarter of 2019 represents two different quarters for two different financial companies, and it's showing the sum of that. When you want to perform such an analysis for the super user having more than one company access, the number may be confusing due to the fact that the dates and names are not in sync. So one must design such reports carefully. In such cases, we always prefer calendar year or global financial year. So one must design such reports carefully. In such cases, we always prefer calendar year or global financial year. You should have columns for that in your multi-company date table. We have seen that in the multi-company scenario, we can create a date table that contains one single date multiple times. We can create a primary key and populate foreign keys in fact tables. In a multi-company situation, Power BI's time intelligence will also work. When a user has access to more than one company or tenant, you must plan how to handle this situation. For periods with the same name but different date ranges, data will be shown together when you use the period name in the visualization. But the message I wanted to convey is that time intelligence works perfectly fine in such scenarios. So why don't you try this out? And let me know if you face any challenges or have more complex use cases to solve. So let me know. I will also try it out with you. Thanks for watching this video. Thank you.